Do you know one man ended every single speech he gave in the Roman Senate, on any topic, with the exact same 5 words? And eventually, those 5 words got an entire civilization erased from the map. This is a story about a grudge that lasted decades, and ended with a city completely wiped off the map. Carthage, once the greatest maritime power in the Mediterranean, had already lost 2 brutal wars against Rome. The Second Punic War alone had cost them nearly everything: their overseas territories, their military, their influence. By all accounts, Carthage should have stopped being a threat to anyone. But it didn't stay weak for long. Freed from the burden of maintaining a massive army, a condition of their surrender, Carthage's economy exploded. Trade flourished. Wealth returned. And in Rome, that recovery didn't look like peace. It looked like a warning. One Roman senator became fixated on that warning more than anyone else: Cato the Elder. According to Roman historians, after visiting Carthage himself and witnessing its resurgence firsthand, Cato became convinced the city would rise again, and threaten Rome all over again. From that point forward, no matter what he was actually debating in the Senate, trade policy, taxes, anything at all, he ended every single speech with the same 5 words: Carthage must be destroyed. For years, Cato's obsession seemed extreme, even to fellow Romans. But slowly, that repeated phrase worked exactly as intended. Roman sentiment shifted. And when Carthage finally defended itself against Rome's ally, the Numidian king Massinissa, breaking the terms of their earlier treaty, Rome had exactly the excuse it had been waiting for. In 149 BC, Rome declared war, launching what would become the Third Punic War. Carthage, desperate to avoid destruction, agreed to almost unthinkable demands, handing over hostages, surrendering their weapons entirely. Rome accepted the surrender, and then delivered one final demand: abandon the city completely, and rebuild it inland, away from the coast. For Carthage, a civilization whose entire identity and wealth was built on maritime trade, that demand was impossible to accept. It wasn't really a peace offer. It was a trap designed to guarantee war either way. Carthage refused. The siege began. What followed was nearly 3 years of brutal, grinding conflict. Roman accounts describe Carthaginian women cutting off their own hair to weave rope for catapults, a besieged population using literally everything they had left to keep fighting. Progress for Rome was painfully slow, until command was finally handed to a young general, Scipio Aemilianus, adopted grandson of the legendary Roman general who had once defeated Hannibal himself. Scipio built a massive barrier sealing off Carthage's harbor entirely, cutting the city off from any escape or resupply. In a last desperate act of defiance, the Carthaginians secretly built an entirely new fleet and dug a hidden channel into the harbor, launching a surprise counterattack that briefly stunned the Romans. It wasn't enough. In the spring of 146 BC, Roman forces finally breached the city walls. What followed was 6 days of brutal house-to-house fighting through Carthage's streets. Roman soldiers were ordered to kill everyone they encountered until the very final day, when the remaining 50,000 survivors were finally taken prisoner instead, and sold into slavery. Carthage was then systematically burned to the ground. Contrary to a popular myth that has lasted centuries, historians have found no actual evidence that Romans salted the earth to prevent anything from ever growing there again. The truth was simpler, and in some ways more chilling: Rome simply forbade anyone from ever rebuilding the city again. One senator's 5-word obsession, repeated for years until an entire empire believed it, ended with a civilization completely erased from the map. Carthage was eventually rebuilt over a century later, as a Roman city. But the Carthage that Cato swore had to be destroyed, never came back at all.